We're going to get started. I would like to welcome our panel here today, who will be talking about open data lakes with Presto, Apache Hudi, AWS Glue, and S3. My name is Robert Hodges. I am the host. I work for Altinity, and we're putting this conference together, OSA Con 2021. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Eric Kavanagh, who will be the moderator for the panel.
Hey, thank you so much, Robert. Very, very excited to be here. Open data lakes with Presto, Apache Hudi, and AWS Glue. And don't forget about S3. So very quickly, I've been in the space a long time, amazed at the innovation that's taking place in our industry, and the future is open. So I'd like to just bring in all of our guests, maybe to give an opening statement, and we'll go from there. Dipti Borkar, I'll throw it over to you first. You've been on the cutting edge of this wave for quite some time now. I'm sure it's pretty exciting to see it sort of come to fruition. Give us your impression about where we're going. I believe that the future of the data lake is open and open source, but what are your thoughts?
Yeah, my opinion might be a bit biased. I've been in open source for a long time, over 10 years. Working on many different projects. Presto is obviously open source, Apache Hudi open source projects. And finally, I think after many years, there is an alternative that platform teams, data platform teams have to go with the completely open analytic stack, right? And this is one that, Presto, Hudi, Glue S3, of course, the cloud is a big part of it. It's one stack. It's certainly open. The open means open source, but it also means open formats. The formats play a big part in this so that you don't have a proprietary lock-in that we've had with other kind of data warehouses in the past. And you get a lot more innovation because on a single lake, you can run many different types of workloads. Interactive query with Presto, transformation with Spark, machine learning with TensorFlow and others, right? And so I think this is perhaps the next 10 years of analytics. Data warehouses will exist. They will coexist next to the lake. I think many users will augment. Many users will be born in the lake. And so, yeah, very excited about the space, and always fun to talk with Vinoth and Roy as well.
And Vinoth, maybe I'll throw this one over to you. In the early days of my career in this industry, data warehousing was really in its heyday, let's say in the early 2000s, basically, and ETL ruled the day. But it seems to me that data pipelines are the new ETL, right? And being able to manage those pipelines, even dynamically, that's one of the critical success factors, right?
Right. Yeah. So just chiming in here, right? If I look at the last 10 years of even data architecture evolution, we've steadily moved away from kind of on-prem data warehouses to cloud data warehousing, right? But if you look at the lake landscape, I think it wasn't until like 3-4 years ago that transactionality and some of these core capabilities that you find in data warehouses, like being able to do updates, deletes, and some of these things have gone mainstream. And now I think if you compare the data landscape right now, you have these sort of like database kind of abstractions over the lake where you can actually write pipelines. And then the pipelines, to your point, back in the day, people used to struggle with a lot of issues around writing pipelines, right? But now things like Apache Hudi can bring transactionality to your pipelines. You know that you can automatically commit output from your ETL data pipelines. And when your queries can have snapshot isolation and many of these things that you actually had in data warehousing, now the gaps are kind of like, at least I would say the basic gaps are all fully closed now. And then they are not just closed, but they are deployed at very large scale by a lot of, tech companies, right? If you look at Hudi, TikTok runs at like an exabyte scale data lake, and then like Uber runs it for like 250, 300 petabytes. And even Amazon score the logistics thing, not AWS, but even the core logistics data now recently more into some of that. So there are lots and lots of things. The technology is maturing very rapidly. So I definitely think the future is going to be more around this open stack, and then we can agree on about few open formats and build a lot of value around all of this, right? So I really look forward to be part of that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I'll throw this one over to Roy. What got me excited talking to Vinoth and Dipti last time around was really thinking about how the conceptual engineering of a database is now being mapped out to discrete open source projects, such that instead of having one technology, for example, you can have an array of technologies, build your stack using these different component parts, but still achieve the preciseness that you need to get the job done, and now at a much greater, much more significant scale. But what do you think, Roy?
Yeah, no, I totally agree, and I think everything that Dipti and Vinoth said is right on. And to your point too, like the breaking up of that, that platform, that old data warehouse into distinct, not necessarily components, but I would almost say distinct architectural layers, right? You got the storage layer, you got the metadata layer, the compute, and now we're introducing sort of the transaction layer, right? What Hudi is doing, and some other solutions on the market are doing as well, but just kind of layering some of these components in a way that makes it scalable for our customers, right? Not a single data warehouse, that there's still lots of value there, right? There's great use cases for a data warehouse, but as you scale your data and you want to do more with it, breaking up that architecture into these distinct layers allow you to really scale each of them. And right, if we talk about the Glue data catalog as being a core component of that open platform, think of it as a way of putting all the metadata in a single place. So it's easier for you to find the data, but then also access it, right? Whether it's Presto or Spark or Hive or whatever that may be, they're all able to go back to that central catalog and say, where do I find the data? How do I access it? Is it Hudi? Is it Parquet? Is it CSV? So that gives you a lot of flexibility to really enable a lot of different use cases. So I'm pretty excited about this. Maybe not, you don't hear it in my voice, but I'm pretty excited about this whole thing.
And the flexibility is the key, right? So I'll throw that over to Dipti. And the other big thing here that I've been watching now for about 10 years is greater and greater visibility into what's happening. And when you break it out into layers, like Roy was suggesting, I think that really improves visibility because you can see what's happening in a layer and you can see what's happening in between layers. And that's how you can find choke points and friction points and so forth to be able to optimize and streamline. Is that about right?
Yeah, good question. I think there's pros and cons to this deconstructed database, right? As I call it. It's we've opened it up, and there are layers, like Roy said, right? Each layer has a function and concerns, right? Storage has particular concerns, and these concerns, like security, they're moving. They might move from the top to the bottom. Hudi, others in the space, their concern is logs, which then allow us to do transactionality, snapshot queries, and so on. And so in terms of visibility, I would say, or flexibility, visibility, I would say that is enabled in some ways by the cloud itself, right? Moving to the cloud, you're getting elasticity. That elasticity allows you, and most of these layers are highly distributed, highly scalable, right? There's, Presto is running at thousands of servers at Uber and Facebook. Hudi is at massive scale, right? So we know that they're very scalable. But for an average platform team, cloud makes it scalable, gives you that elasticity. And then at each layer, the beauty of it is you can mix and match, right? And so, here we're talking about Presto, Hudi, Glue, S3. I think S3 stays. That's probably the one layer that stays. And then you have a catalog, which is the Glue catalog or the Hive Metastore. You can pick one, right? And then the transaction layer, you can pick one, and you have a compute engine and you pick one, or multiple, right? And so this gives you flexibility to give you, so that you're not fundamentally locked in. And the advantage is all of these work on open formats. So Parquet, for example, is a format that's picked for, that's very popular for Hudi and the other transaction managers, right? Table formats, and it's open and widely understood. And so then you can have optimizations built on top of these open formats, where a layer on the top, like Presto, can consume the optimizations for Hudi and then provide capabilities on top of it, like the snapshot queries or time travel, as it's called, in some other format. So yeah, I think the cloud plays a big part in the flexibility. Open formats play a big part. Orc and Parquet being the most popular, and then you can pick, right? You can pick your engine, you can pick your transaction manager, and you can, over time, you can move over. It's a lot easier to move versus a Teradata in the old days where it's very hard to migrate off.
Yeah, and Vinoth, maybe I'd love some detail from you on the transaction layer. What kind of capabilities do you offer, and what were the first capabilities? Like when you began this journey, what was the first and second things you were trying to accomplish with Hudi?
Yeah, so yeah, that's a great question actually. So right now, if you take like ACID, right? So we just started with something basic like the A, right? Because because that wasn't there.
Atomicity,
believe me or not.
Right.
Because you would write data pipelines and then you would, let's say a data pipeline wrote 10 files. There was no atomic way of saying, yeah, I atomically added 10 files into this particular table, right? So that's actually what we started with. So Hudi was born at Uber, where we actually, even right at the outset, right, we were designing for updates and deletes and mutability, and also building even some CDC, more advanced kind of database capability like CDC from the get-go, because that was the business context in which like Hudi was built, where we were trying to replicate our core trip databases into the data lake very quickly. As you know, Uber is a very real-time business, and there is actually dollar value in getting data faster. We can run a lot more fraud checks. We can report fraud quicker, which results in more money back in the coffers. So it's like real needs but so we essentially did A initially. Like D was provided by, we were on HDFS. And then most of the analytics use cases were single writer. So what we did was tried, and then when I think we talk about transactionality a lot, right? But these transactions are actually, if you look at it from a database perspective, they are large, long-running transactions, right? These are like larger jobs. These are not like your transactions that you do in a OLTP database like MySQL or Oracle.
That's a good point,
right? So you have to design things separately. So some of these locking-based mechanisms that you do, as anybody would tell you if they worked in databases, that if you have long-running transactions and you do locks, then you just increase the probability that you're going to get some deadlocks, right?
Right.
So so for a while actually we kept with the single writer model, and we use an upstream queue like Kafka or an Airflow job or in the workflow orchestrator for these jobs to actually serialize this data that you wanted to upsert. And then the idea was this is now built for large scalability. Earlier this year, we added more optimistic concurrency control, as well as what we had, which is more multi-version concurrency control. It's operates more lock-free. So we have like different versions of these. We are building out some yearly versions of multi-table transactions using this, but we right now we are dogfooding it in an internal metadata use case, but we'll yearly next year, you can expect us to open it up for more and expose it through like a general SQL layer. And we also add SQL actually pretty late. So we have SQL now, SQL support for Spark SQL, and yeah, that's the beginnings of Hudi. And I wouldn't compare directly what this against like the trade-offs that a transaction manager in a data warehouse makes, right? They are, I think, built for very different use cases. All the, at least Hudi trades off, at least at this point, trades off a lot of the, the advanced features for, higher scale, and then being able to run like, jobs which are writing from thousands of cores. That is simply not possible if you have like a tens of nodes of clusters, and you'll run into concurrency bottlenecks if you build it like that.
Yeah, right. And I'll throw this next question at Roy, but I'll make a comment to Dipti. You used a magic word for me, deconstruct, right? Deconstruction. I actually wrote my thesis on deconstruction 30 years ago in college, so it's a topic near and dear to my heart. And I actually deconstructed Edward Albee's zoo story for my English thesis. And Roy, there's a great line in the zoo story by Edward Albee where he says, sometimes it is necessary to go a long distance out of the way in order to come back a short distance correctly. And as I think about that quote in this context, it's kind of interesting because the Cassandra rollout happened because Facebook realized there was no off-the-shelf technology to do that job. And so they relaxed consistency and built this new engine, right? And then, of course, what happens? Time passes, like, we really love that consistency. What can we do to solve that problem? And that's kind of what we see happening around the open source community. And that's a bit abstract, but what do you think about all that, Roy?
I mean, generally speaking, I think technology is a pendulum, right? You know, we swing one way, we do something, and then we swing back and we kind of do it again, or we do it a little bit better. And we just keep going around and make incremental improvements. But I think a lot of it is driven by sort of technology advancements, you know, the work that Vinoth is doing on Hudi, the work that Dipti is doing on Presto, and everything else. And also the work that AWS is doing, just working with our customers to truly understand their problems and their challenges. And build that into capabilities and into the service, right? Because when we first launch something, we know it works and it works fine. But then as customers start to put more and more data on it and are doing more things with it, that's when we really learn, right? So to Vinoth's point about, hey, we need to figure out a better concurrency controls, and we need to be able to have multiple writers. That's all stemming from customers wanting to do more with what we're building. And I think that's a really, really awesome way to take that input and kind of advance our technology, as opposed to kind of sitting there and saying, like, what's the next thing that we can go build, right? And we're doing that too, but taking that feedback is really powerful. And for us, like in the context of like the Glue data catalog, for example, the perfect example, we looked at Hive, right? We looked at the Hive beta store, and we said, we got to be able to give customers something that's more manageable, right? It's a great tool. And it's a really important aspect of the open data platform, right? It's the metadata layer, and it's becoming more and more critical in everything that we do today. How do we add more reliability, resiliency, and actually make it easier for customers to manage by offloading that and building it into a serverless service, but still maintaining the same open interfaces and compatibility, so it can just keep working with all the other engines out there. And now we're working on how do we make it more scalable? How do we make it more performant? It is very scalable, very performant, but there's almost always more things that we can do as Presto and Spark and all these other engines are getting faster and having more optimizations. We got to make sure that we're carrying those optimizations over as well. At the end of the day, you know, today data lakes are, you know, substantial, right? But they're not huge. If you fast forward 5 years from now, everybody's going to have, you know, multiple petabytes of data in their data lake. So we really have to think about that.
Yeah. And Dipti, I'll throw this over to you. Always when we make these big innovations, we're excited, good things happen, and then we're like, oh man, I wish I'd done that one thing, right? I mean, I've heard all sorts of interesting stories over the years of how to, if we could go back in time and change something, what would we have done differently today? Can you think of any examples in this environment where looking back, you're like, you know, like I remember someone, I was talking to an expert who we were talking about Kubernetes and how it's stateless. And he was joking. He's like, yeah, I think some of the people involved in that are like, maybe we should have had that a different perspective when we thought this out in the beginning to embrace state as a key consideration. But in this environment, what do you think lessons learned 5 years ago? If you could have done something differently, what would it have been?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that there's a lot of lessons learned from prior generations of technology, right? Like, for example, you were talking about Cassandra. I remember building out transactions for Couchbase, right? Same thing, right? First you get to atomicity, you know, durability, because those are the most important concerns. Isolation levels, we never got there, you know, because, you know, do you really need it? And so the question becomes, do you just take what was and apply it directly? And when that's done that way, it doesn't work, because technology doesn't necessarily repeat. The cycles don't repeat, they rhyme, right?
Yes,
so they're
right.
Similar, but you have to apply it in this new context. And this new context is a disaggregated stack. And so the design choices that we are making for this stack are actually very different then the database, the warehouse made, right? This conversation is like the 80s when they were adding basic transactionality to the database, right? In some ways, there's so much more to go. There's so many more things that need to be built. The state of the art, there's a lot more than what the OpenStack has today. I think that we can keep innovating for the next 5 to 10 years, right? Building on this stack. In terms of key specific lessons learned, I think from the Hadoop space, right? What we learned is it became too complicated. There were too many projects and too many almost components, right? Very, very small components that had to be put together. And we were depending on the user and the platform team to figure it all out. Yes, if you're an internet company, perhaps you could get there, right? But most projects did not succeed. And so now with this mass migration to the cloud, what that enabled us to do is build managed services. And to Roy's point earlier, it is simplifying things for the end user so that the power of those technologies can then be really used widely, right? By a 2-person pizza team, by a 100-person team, right? And that's what the Glue, AWS Glue kind of platform does. That's what we're trying to do with, we obviously have open source Presto that we're contributing to, but that's the Ahana part of it, where we are building a much easier service to use. And so it's 3 or 4 key elements of the stack, not 50 components, right? And I think that people are seeing that they can they're very scared, right? After you've invested in Hadoop that much, it's like, do I want to go back to the warehouse? And the team here is like, no, wait, hang on. We've done a better job this time around because we've learned from those lessons and simplified, right? So simplification, elasticity, we will make the wrong choices. I'm saying that now, right? But some of them, and but these important ones, the hard things we fix now early on, ease of use is very hard, right? The simplest things are actually hard to achieve. If you can get it easy now, and scalable, that'll take us a long way. So yeah, I'm not sure if that's the best answer, but I think that just having worked on, this is my 6th distributed system that I'm working on, right? And so you learn from these design choices that you make and you try to do better.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And maybe Vinoth, I'll throw this over to you, my eponymous partner, Dr. Robin Bloor, he's mostly retired these days, but we focused on the open source movement quite intently 10 to 6 years ago when Hadoop was really taking off. And he made a very interesting observation one day, despite the tremendous innovation that occurred in all these different camps, you did have some quarreling amongst different groups and companies. And of course, 2 of those companies merged, which was a fascinating development, I must say. But he made this interesting point that one of the downsides, almost the Achilles heel to the open source movement, was that because there's no one in charge, it's almost like the classic ship of fools. And I thought that was like, oh, it's so a bit disrespectful. But he made a good point because there's no one in charge. And so when I see you guys talking about this stack, that gives me optimism because now you have perspective and you have purpose, and it's not just one project, right? One project has its own purpose, its own direction, if you will, trajectory. But when you align projects, that's when you can really start getting somewhere. And that, of course, is what some of the vendors were trying to do, but they were kind of competing with each other and competing in maybe some ways that weren't too productive. But what do you think about that? I think we're kind of coming out of that conundrum. What do you think, Vinoth?
Yeah, so it's actually a great question, and it's not often that people actually talk about this, right? So here's my take on it. My take on that was the lot of that quarreling or the focus, like the open source didn't win then, not because of the open source itself, the intrinsic nature of openness or decentralized decision making or anything, but more around business factors that led to people fighting over, let's say, ORC versus Parquet for 6 years, right? So that is kind of like the thing that really that meant as companies, you're not really focusing on the customer, right?
Right.
When I showed
Good
up at
point.
Uber, I wasn't trying to build really any, trying to build like a data lake storage or anything. I wish I started building the ingestion system because there was nothing there, right? I won't name who, but we were trying a few of these vendors that you're referring to. And then there was nothing there that we could take and use it at that scale. That's how we started building to begin with. And I can actually cite even few open source projects that started in that era that are all like kind of like born like that. There are tons and tons of successful open source projects who actually get like things done, moving, right? And that unfortunately has become like some kind of like a a tag that has been like attached to the data lake / Hadoop area in some sense. But I also know, by the way, like great talent in all of those companies now gone to do other great things in the industry as well, right? So I think open source generally moves slower, but I think it's the more sustainable thing. It's like eating broccoli. I think it's what's over time more sustainable. But of course, but that to underscore that point, right? One thing, at least even at the Hudi community level, we try to do is we try to build out a platform company. We try to make it easier for people learning from that experience and to do end-to-end solutions quickly with the project. Not just, you may have to tinker around with it, right? But hey, that's how grassroots open source looks like, right? But you get like more full-fledged solutions from the project. So that's a lens that we try to take to kind of balance this out a bit. Otherwise, someone proprietary may with a lot of money could try to outpace open source, right?
Right, no doubt. And Roy, I'll throw this question over to you because I know we're almost out of time here, but the file format concept, I just love that attention was paid to file formats. And now Parquet has really taken off. And that's great news in all kinds of different ways. One is just reusability. There are lots of companies that are now embracing Parquet as a standard and then allowing other companies their clients basically to throw all kinds of data and all kinds of analytic capabilities together to really understand big picture stuff. And I'm thinking in particular in the marketing world where you've got 8,000 different software as a service applications that people can use, 8,000 just for sales and marketing, for crying out loud. And I know a vendor that does backup and storage, but they're doing other things too. And they save as a Parquet file to be able to enable all these other sort of types of data to be and analytical capabilities to be leveraged. So to me, that's very exciting. What do you think about the sort of overall, the ongoing conversation around file formats, and is Parquet the future?
Yeah, that's a good question. As Vinoth said, right? It took 6 years for us to argue about ORC or,
that's
or
right.
Parquet, and I think there's still people who still argue about it. But that's okay, right? At the end of the day, ORC and Parquet sort of solve the same problem, slightly different, but that's okay. You can have multiple. We really love Parquet, right? The use cases that our customers are able to enable with Parquet and the tools that our customers use really leverage Parquet and the capabilities that they bring. And for a large majority of what customers need, it solves the problem, right? It offers you a fully standard way to store your data. There's optimizations that are built into it to kind of offload some of the optimizations that may live in a query engine, for example, down to the storage layer. So now you can actually take that data and move it from one place to another, but still kind of maintain some of these optimizations. So you have consistent performance improvement across the board, right? So whether I'm using Ahana or I'm using Amazon Athena or I'm using Databricks, all the optimizations are very consistent. Now, there's going to be some secret sauce from each of these engines, which is great, but at least you have consistent optimization. So we really think that, I personally think that Parquet is going to stick around. I think we're going to keep evolving it and making it better. And even if you look at Hudi or Delta Lake and even the AWS Lake Formation governed tables that we launched at last reInvent, they're all using Parquet under the covers. So if you did want to take that data and move it somewhere else, you can do it at any time, right? You're not locked in, but you get all the performance benefits that you can get out of that file format. So will there be other formats out there that will come in and say like, we're much better, we're faster, we're cheaper, whatever? Yes, of course, there will always be. But the great thing about this whole decoupling or deconstruction is that you could just slot in a new file format and Hudi will support it, right? Glue Data Catalog will support it. Presto will support it. That's really the beauty.
They'll evolve, right? Adding Bloom filters now to Parquet, right? So they'll continue to evolve. Optimizations will be added in at every layer, and every layer can support it, right? So
exactly.
Well, and that's the key. And if you have this stack where you can optimize any layer, that's great because now you're not locked in to one proprietary format. I think that's a bit of a comment on one of the other players in our space here. But when you're not locked in, that gives you the agility to be able to move in different directions and just cater to what your teams want, where your skills gravity is. What do you think about that, Dipti?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, to close out, we're out of time already, but yeah, open. I mean, we believe in open. I think that there's other ways vendors can create value, right? Vendors can create value by adding flexibility, cloud supportability, many other things, deeper differentiation, for sure. Pick a query engine, right? Pick the right query engine for the job. See if you need transactionality, if you need a table format. It's that is something, S3 is immutable, right? And so you didn't have updates, couldn't do updates, and now you have that option. So finally, you can run data warehouse workloads on an open data lake, get the openness and the flexibility at a lower cost, right? And so yes, there will be capabilities that still don't exist yet. They will be there in 2-3 years, but this is future proofing it. And so yeah, those are some thoughts to close out.
I love it. Future proofing. Great panel, guys. Thank you so much.
Thanks all. Cheers, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thank
This
you.
has been
Bye-bye.
great.
Yeah, it was fun.
Take care.